please don't be too nice. Like when you guys put somebody in the car and you're protecting their head, I said, you can take the hand away. Okay.
Now they're...
Gosh.
You see what's going on now?
A member of the press.
Now there's just...
Rioting is not protesting.
We've just had to run about a block as police moved in. We've been fired at with rubber bullets. My cameraman has been hit.
We are not going to let local governments defund law enforcement, okay? We're going to make sure at the state level we protect our communities.
This is the 11th night of tear gas being fired at protesters here.
Setting fires is not protesting.
We will be enforcing the law. Please leave the area peacefully.
Let's just get this out of the way, because we're going to be talking about U.S. presidential elections, which means, people, like it or not, we are in the land of old white men, okay? And not just any old white men, old, powerful, immortal white men who they will keep alive by any means necessary. Old, powerful, rich white men do not just die of old age, baby. No, no, no. They get old. Older than old. They get older than the collections accounts on your credit report old. Older than that toupee Donald Trump still won't part with old. They have to get so old, they start trying to get a head start on death, okay? Them start decaying while they're still alive. I mean, just look at this. Respectfully, that man perished many moons ago. I say that to say, I'm not gonna do the whole Joe Biden's too old to run for re-election, because Joe Biden has already been dead for 15 years. Look at this.
Mr. President, thank you. At the end of such a momentous event,
That's given living to you? We swore Bernie was too old back in 2016, and Bernie done lived long enough to lose 2 Democratic primaries, become a meme, and solidify himself in the hearts of young leftists everywhere. We swore McCain was too old back in 2008, and I swear to God, that man just died the other day. Wealth and power keep you living so long. Trust that these dinosaurs will use every drop of healthcare your broke ass will never have access to ensure that they make it around long enough to tell you to drink bleach in the next pandemic.
Right, and then I see the disinfectant where it knocks it out in a minute.
Now that that's out the way, Joe Biden recently announced that he'll be running for re-election again. Okay. Listen, I truly don't know who's excited about this. But to be fair, I also don't know anybody who's outraged about it either, because there was no reason to believe that he wouldn't be running. Incumbent presidents always do, and we haven't seen any Democrats with popular support willing to primary him. And if I'm fair, I can't fault them, because there's no real reason to. I don't think there's any Democrat politician popular enough or who would receive enough support to make it worth their while attempting to primary a sitting US president of their own party. It's likely just political suicide that isn't worthwhile long term. I'm not a fan of Joe Biden for a number of significant reasons, but I want to focus on my main problem with him. He stays tap dancing for the police to fatten their pockets while fueling the mass incarceration of Black people. Which is also why his vice president is our girl Kamala, throw your ass in jail Harris. And I'm not gonna do too much on Kamala today, cause she been chilling. It's pretty widely known at this point that Joe Biden was responsible for the 1994 crime bill. For those who aren't familiar with the law, it's responsible for bringing us the likes of things like 3 strikes law, mandatory life sentences for repeat offenders, and funding more policing in prisons. And before topping the mass incarceration charts with the 1994 crime bill, Joe Biden's first smash hit was the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1986. That act set mandatory minimums for crack cocaine offenses with much harsher sentences compared with powder cocaine.
That's suspicious. That's weird.
Mind you, he had none of this smoke for his son and his drug use or any of the litany of issues Hunter Biden has. And it's not that I want him to treat his son's addiction with criminalization. It's that he wouldn't dream of doing such a thing, but he couldn't dream of handling it any other way if the person struggling with addiction looks like me. But none of that is my gripe with him present day. It doesn't matter to me what's in Joe Biden's heart, nor am I dogmatically angry with him for the past. If in the present, Biden were trying to move away from over-policing and mass incarceration, I'd be happy to take that. Unfortunately, that's just not the tea. Biden is very much so the police-loving, mass incarceration, respectability politics pushing man he's always been. And that's why it's time to pull his file. Before being elected, Joe Biden promised me, us, that if he was elected, he'd give us all $2,000 stimulus checks. But when he won, broke boy Biden tells us it's $2,000 subtract what he already gave us. But then in May of 2020, Biden, a man who was just counting pennies with our stimulus money, praised state and local governments for committing to use at least $10 billion in federal stimulus money to bolster police departments. He encouraged them to spend even more on police and to do it quickly to beat the summer crime spike. He expressly committed to funding a whopping 100,000 additional police officers. Mind you, the police killed at least 1,195 people in 2022 that we know of, and they've already killed 320 people this year. And black people were 26% of people killed by police in 2022, despite being only 13% of the population. In May 2022, Biden signed an executive order he called the most significant police reform in decades that included a national law enforcement accountability database that would give us detailed information about police officers who commit misconduct. That database was supposed to launch on January 20th of this year. And it's May. Where the database at? And he admonished protesters on every chance he could get.
This violence of looting and burning and destruction of property. Rioting is not protesting. Looting is not protesting. Setting fires is not protesting.
But with all of Biden's flaws, I want to be clear. For everything bad about Joe Biden, there are 10 worse things about DeSantis and Trump, who are devil and demon, evil ghoul-like creatures who mean us harm. The only question we really need to ask ourselves is, which is the devil and which is just a demon? To answer that, it's time to play a little game called How Evil Are We? We're gonna go bar for bar on the evil. Starting off strong, Trump gave us smash hits like January 6th, a whole goddamn insurrection where these really tried to take the Capitol. Yeah, that happened. In 2021, DeSantis championed the anti-riot law, which among other things grants civil immunity to people who decide to drive their cars into protesters who are blocking a road. U.S. District Judge Mark Walker ruled the law unconstitutional because it was so vague and overbroad it amounted to an assault on the First Amendment rights of free speech and assembly, as well as the Constitution's due process protections because, quote, people engaged in peaceful protests are innocently the same area when a demonstration turned violent could face felonies and stiff penalties. The law would have made it a felony to block traffic during a protest and added additional felonies for property damage. Speaking of unconstitutional, Trump gave us not one, not two, but three bozos on the Supreme Court, and that's why it's the kangaroo court now. But that's not all, folks. Trump hated police brutality protests more than DeSantis ever could dream of doing it. Rapid fire bonus points. Trump sent the National Guard and federal police to Kenosha to brutalize protesters. Then he gave Kenosha police $1 million and another $41 million to support all the police in Wisconsin for a job well done brutalizing the protesters. Then he sent federal police to the courthouses in Portland to beat up those protesters. Then he signed an executive order giving people 10-year sentences for destroying any federal property on monuments. DeSantis passed the Don't Say Gay bill, which prohibited discussion of sexual orientation or gender identity in schools. But Trump launched a thing called Operation Legend that led to 5,500 more arrests. But DeSantis not only passed a host of laws restricting voting and gerrymandering the f*** out of Florida to suppress people's right to vote, he also had 19 people, mostly black, arrested for a political stunt. Vanity Fair said, quote, what happened was that DeSantis essentially exploited mass confusion around a Florida amendment that allowed some ex-felons to vote. Body camera footage obtained in October by the Tampa Bay Times showed an officer expressing surprise about the charges against the man he was tasked with handcuffing and telling someone on the phone, I've never seen these charges before in my life. Trump gave hundreds of millions of dollars worth of surplus military equipment to local police. But DeSantis passed the Stop Woke Act, which bans conversations about race in schools and businesses and allows students and workers, white students and workers, to sue if they believe a classroom lesson or workplace training course caused them to feel guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress due to their race. But Trump signed an executive order to help prevent violence against the police. But DeSantis eliminated Medicaid coverage for transgender care for people of any age and also barred transgender girls from competing in sports. And before the Supreme Court even overturned Roe, DeSantis signed a law banning abortions beginning at 15 weeks of pregnancy with no exceptions for rape or incest. But Trump gave the DOJ nearly $400 million for new police training. At the moment, I'm not here to convince you who is the lesser of the evils or to debate with you about whether voting matters. It does, though. So much as I just want to address the overall problems with having all of your options deeply steeped in fueling mass incarceration and making police richer and richer. while the people they harass and criminalize get poorer, despite the fact that America already spends more money on policing and mass incarceration than any other nation, and we have nothing to show for it if you let the constant fear-mongering news tell it. Which is why Biden, Trump, DeSantis, the DNC, and the GOP really are all a sea of conch shells of the week. Hey! I know usually at this point in the video, it would be the end and I would be giving you an animal fact, but if you look down, I bet you can see you've got a lot more video left, and that's because we are now introducing the second segment that will be featured on the show, and that's the What's the 411, where I give you a more serious, news-approached monologue about something that requires a lot more nuance of a discussion. This time it's going to be on abolition, and I just wanted to give y'all a little advance notice, introduce it to y'all since it's the first time we doing it. We're really building out this show brick by brick, and I'm glad that y'all are participating in this journey with me. So let me know how y'all feel about it in the comments. I'm really excited to give y'all this and what we next have planned for y'all. You'll still get your animal fact at the end of this video, I promise. I'm an abolitionist. Yes, that does mean I believe we need to abolish prisons, policing, and America's entire criminal system as it exists. But we recognize that the powers that be won't simply open up all the cells and close all the courts tomorrow, just as we recognize that we do not yet have the resources, the institutions, and the support systems in place to make that feasible. But we also recognize that mass incarceration is invested in ensuring that we never do. Which is why the first thing you should know is that abolition is a vision for the future. A world where we've divested from police, courts, and prisons, because instead of pumping money into the criminalization of the most disenfranchised among us, we put that money into addressing the root causes of crime, like poverty, unemployment, poor housing, starved school systems, mental health issues, and more. We must reckon with what our criminal system is to understand why abolition isn't about depriving us of the means to stop crime or address harm. It's allowing us to design a system where we do those things for the very first time, because that is not what we currently do. Mass incarceration is slavery, a fact that the 13th Amendment explicitly acknowledges by abolishing slavery except for anyone convicted of a crime. In the same breath that the US government purported to abolish slavery, they established the means to continue the practice. And slavery is as much a business as it is a sin. And a business is meant not just to continue, but to expand, to make more and more money. Nearly 2 million people are incarcerated in America, over 400,000 of whom have not had a trial or been convicted of any crime. Nearly 60% of all incarcerated people are Black or Latino, and the vast majority of incarcerated people earned wages below the poverty line prior to their arrest. And America makes over $11 billion yearly in goods produced by prison labor, both private and public. Incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people owe at least $27.6 billion in fines and fees nationwide. Their families spend over $2.9 billion in commissaries each year, in addition to another $14.8 billion in costs associated with moving, eviction, and homelessness brought on by these cases. No system that is designed and maintained in furtherance of making money by subjugating and imprisoning specific populations for allegedly committing certain harms simultaneously intends to rid us of those harms and thus their means of production. So if slavery is a system of bondage where a person is treated as property, deprived of their freedom and personal liberty, and forced to perform labor for another's gain, mass incarceration is slavery. And it's making the rich richer and absolutely no one safer. But I understand that in spite of everything I'm going to say to you, if this is the first time you're hearing about abolition, or maybe you even know a little about it, it might seem impossible or crazy. And that's fair. The first time I heard about abolition, I was a junior in college being introduced to Our Prisons Obsolete by Angela Davis by my thesis advisor, and it sounded crazy to me too. But if you want to change someone's mind about something, the first thing you need to understand, what I believe my professor understood when she referred me to Angela Davis, instead of engaging how taken aback I was at the very concept of abolition, is that nobody ever abandons their entire worldview the first time it's challenged. It doesn't matter how many facts, stats, case studies, compelling narratives, or undeniable evidence you have on your side, people simply do not rip the foundation out from under themselves at the first indication that there may be cracks. People believe what they're taught, and rarely on their own do they have occasion to question what was presented to them as fundamental truths. The sky is blue, grass is green, cops are good, robbers are bad, justice is served when someone goes to jail. But just having it brought to my attention that we didn't always have or rely on prisons, combined with the realization that there are other countries that do not invest in punitive prison systems and instead invest in genuinely care-based, community-based, rehabilitative models, immediately shifted my world. Just learning that it was possible to have a society without prisons instantly diminished how radical the mere suggestion had seemed to me, because up until that point, I'd never noticed that because I was born into a world with prisons, I thought they were as natural to earth as dirt, water, and air, rather than the man-made institutions that they are. But before we can understand how we get to abolition and why it's necessary, we first must understand why mass incarceration and prisons aren't, and exactly what they're meant to accomplish. When you say you want to abolish the prison industrial complex, or more specifically, policing in prisons, one of the first things people ask you is how then will we stop crime? And the premise that underlines that question, that our existing system does this, is wrong. Because our criminal system does not address, stop, or prevent crime, because that's not what it's intended to do. In fact, it's meant to reproduce it. America's criminal system is a vehicle for maintaining racial, social, and economic inequality by criminalizing poor Black and brown communities, using them for labor, and saddling them with debt, trauma, and rap sheets whose lifelong collateral consequences can rarely be outrun. It's not a coincidence that the same communities dubbed high crime areas are those most under-resourced and remain that way generation after generation. We all want to live in a society that is free of crime and the social ills that reproduce it. But continuing to invest in policing and mass incarceration of communities whose well-being we've never invested in only takes us further and further away from that goal. In America, the police killed at least 1,195 people in 2020 that we know of, and they've already killed 320 people this year. Black people were 26% of people killed by police in 2022, despite being only 13% of the population. According to the Vera Institute of Justice, police arrest someone every 3 seconds in this country. Yet, a 2020 review from University of Utah professor Shima Bergholm found that police solve just 2% of all major crimes. But the United States has the highest incarceration rate in the world and spends an estimated $300 billion yearly on policing and prisons, a figure that has continued to skyrocket despite record drops in crime. Yet, political leaders in the media continue to sensationalize and manufacture crime waves to scare the public into feeling unsafe, no matter how divorced that feeling is from reality, so that we continue to support inflated police budgets, militarized police departments, and incarcerating residents of the most under-resourced communities. Still, people ask abolitionists, what will we do about the rapists and the murderers without prisons? First, it's worth noting that more than 80% of arrests nationwide are for misdemeanors, low-level, and non-violent offenses. Rape, murder, and other horrific and sensationalized crimes are simply not a reflection of the bulk of what's in our criminal system. They're just what receives the most media attention. Further and importantly, condemning violence doesn't stop it from reoccurring. Understanding and alleviating the causes of violence does. But to the question, what do we do about the rapists? To that I ask, what are we doing about them now? In a piece for The Guardian titled, "Who Will Protect You from Rape Without Police?" Moira Donegan answers the question perfectly, and she says, and I quote, "But the notion that abolishing the police will have negative repercussions for women radically misunderstands both American policing and sexual violence. Police abolition need not be considered an abdication of the responsibility to protect women, but rather a way to fulfill it. Police never investigate most sexual violence because most sexual violence goes unreported. According to the Rape and Incest National Network, or RAIN, a little less than 25% of sexual assaults are reported to the police, significantly less than other violent crimes. There is ample evidence that sexual assault victims who distrust the police are correct. Police departments systematically fail to make arrests in sexual assault cases, and their failures are mirrored throughout the justice system. According to RAIN, only 4.6% of sexual assaults ever lead to arrest, 4.6, and only 0.9% are ever referred by police to prosecutors. Conviction rates are also lower than for other violent crimes, in part because of police mishandling the sexual assault cases. Then there's this troubling fact. The police themselves are often perpetrators of gender violence, and they frequently use the privileges and protections of their job to hurt women with impunity. Police households have dramatically higher rates of domestic violence than other homes, with approximately 40% of officers having intimate partner violence in their households, compared to just 10% of the general population. Sometimes police failures to investigate sexual violence look like the result not just of stupidity, but outright duplicity, she says. One study of the New York Police Department discovered it was knowingly undercounting rapes in its public figures, using a deliberately strict definition of rape in order to shrink the number of reported rapes in New York. An inquiry into the NYPD found its Special Victims Unit division to be grossly dysfunctional, with officers instructed to simply not investigate misdemeanor sexual assault cases. Conservative estimates indicate that American police departments have over 200,000 untested rape kits in their possession, with DNA samples that could be used to identify rapists and prevent future assaults collecting dust, often because police have not bothered to send them to be tested. On top of that, a 2015 investigation by the Associated Press found that roughly 1,000 officers lost their badges in a 6-year period for rape, sodomy, and other sexual assault, sex crimes that included possession of child pornography, or sexual misconduct such as propositioning citizens or having consensual but prohibited on-duty intercourse. A 2003 national study by the Police Professionalism Initiative found that 40% of reported cases of police sexual misconduct involved teens, often young women involved in youth engagement and job shadowing programs. Despite our reluctance to state plainly what mass incarceration is, it's why abolition is neither radical nor unnecessary. Abolition is about preventing harm and the fundamental recognition that what we're doing now doesn't do that, because it's not meant to. Instead, it makes matters worse, because it's meant to. Even if we believe that there are just bad, poor people doing violent things, what is solved by locking those people in a box and making them spend every waking moment defending themselves from violence, sexual assault, and other abuses, all while trying to survive the psychological abuses of incarceration? If we also saddle them with fines and criminal convictions that prevent them from ever leaving poverty or the circumstances that led them to prison, not only have we done nothing to address the violent crime that's been condemned, we've given them every reason to act violently in the future. Then those people are released and sent back into the same struggling, under-resourced communities. That's why mass incarceration only ensures that communities that were already plagued by crime and violence never escape it. That's the problem with using prisons to disappear people while never addressing the underlying problems. The problems survive, even if the people don't. That's why defunding the police, ending cash bail, and other laws, policy, and reform efforts that actually take power away from the state and decarcerate are central to getting us to a world without policing and prisons. But while FAIR doesn't create that world, it is precisely what keeps 2 million people locked behind bars, while the social ills that led them there rage on unaddressed. It's what keeps us protesting America's criminal system, all while continuing to invest in that system. It's not fear of the people we've locked away. It's fear of the reckoning with the fact that despite incarcerating more people than anywhere else in the world and spending more money on some local police departments than other countries spend on their militaries, you aren't and don't feel any safer. The fear is in starting over. The daunting task of what it would mean to start from scratch. The fear of trying to create something new and possibly failing. The fear of admitting that all the harm mass incarceration has caused was for naught. And knowing that what's been done to people, communities, generations cannot be made right. Fear, just like guilt and defensiveness, cannot create. But it does keep us stuck in place, hiding our problems behind bars. Everybody knew peacocks were fly as fuck, but did you know they could fly? Like, we knew they ran. They're always walking freely about the zoo, but knowing that they know how to fly really adds a different layer to it. And we recently learned that they can fly because one of them peacocks flew their ass out the Bronx Zoo, went gallivanting through the night, and came back when they was good and ready, child.